By the time I found that letter, my son had a daughter he never knew was alive. Buried inside it was one line meant for a dying woman to hand her own child, use the baby, or lose the last chance to make an old wrong right. I understood none of it yet, standing at a diner counter, staring at a pregnant waitress I swore I recognized. That letter was still months away. So was the lawyer, the missed phone call I almost let go to voicemail, and the night my only son stopped looking me in the eye. All of it began on an ordinary Saturday in October in a diner I only walked into because I did not want to eat alone in an empty house one more time. Before I take you back to where it started, I want to ask you something. Have you ever looked at a stranger's face and understood in the space of one breath that everything you believed about your own family was wrong? If that has happened to you, tell me in the comments below. I read everyone, and I would like to know I was not the only man that blind. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because none of it makes sense unless you see it the way I did. My name is Emery Voss. I am 68 years old, and I own a furniture restoration shop on Sunset Drive in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. One my grandfather started with a single workbench and a good set of hands. 3 generations of the Voss men have made their living pulling old wood back from the edge of ruin. Wood tells you the truth if you know how to listen. People I have learned are not nearly as honest. There was a rocking chair on my workbench that week, walnut missing its right runner that I had been slow to finish. Corinne used to tease me for taking longer on the pieces that mattered to me most. I told myself I was simply behind on orders. I understand now that I had made a habit since she died of stretching out anything that felt like it was almost done. Holt had called that afternoon the way he did most Saturdays that year. Checking on me, he said. Asking whether I had eaten, whether the shop was holding steady, whether I needed anything before he came by the following week. He had gotten better about calling since his mother died, and I had let myself believe that meant something good about him. I did not know yet that most of my son's attention that year had nothing to do with me at all. That Saturday, I drove down to the Copper Kettle the way I had every week since my wife Corinne passed 3 years earlier. It was not a special place. Good coffee, honest portions, a bell over the door that needed oiling. I always ordered the chicken pot pie, the same thing Corinne used to order, because some habits outlive the person who started them. The diner was half full that evening. A table of tourists near the window, an old couple in the corner booth, a basketball game playing on the television over the counter that nobody was watching. I sat where I always sat, third stool from the register, and waited for coffee that never came fast enough. That was when I heard the kitchen door swing open behind the counter. A young woman came through it, carrying a tray of water glasses, moving carefully, one hand resting low on a stomach that was clearly, unmistakably pregnant. 7 months, maybe more. Her apron was tied twice around her middle because once was not enough anymore. Her hair had come loose from its knot on one side, and she looked like a woman who had been on her feet since sunrise and had decided a long time ago not to complain about it. I was not looking at her the way a man looks at a stranger. I was not really looking at her at all until she turned toward the light coming through the front window. I knew that face. I knew the small scar above her lip. I knew the particular way her left eyebrow sat just slightly higher than her right, the same crooked tilt I had noticed the first time she ever sat at my dinner table, nervous, laughing too quickly at something I said, holding my son's hand under the table like she was afraid the moment might disappear if she let go. Ren. The name came out of me before I decided to say it. It was barely louder than a breath, but the diner was quiet enough that it carried the 4 feet between us. Her head snapped toward me. For 1 full second, her eyes met mine, and I watched every bit of color drain out of her face the way water drains from a tub when you pull the plug. Fast. Complete. Nothing left behind but the shape of what used to be there. Then she turned and pushed back through the swinging kitchen door so hard It slapped against the wall on the other side. A woman near the register went very still. I would learn her name was Delphine before the night was over, but in that moment, I only registered the way her eyes moved between the swinging door and me, quick and deliberate, like she was deciding in the space of a few seconds whose side she was going to be on. It had been 4 months since anyone in the family had spoken her name out loud. I do not remember standing up. I remember the stool scraping against the floor. I remember the woman in the corner booth looking up at the sound of it. And I remember thinking with a kind of clarity I had not felt in 3 years that I was not going to sit there and let that door close on whatever this was. My son had told all of us months earlier that his marriage was over, that Ren was not the person she had led us believe she was, that it was finished, and it was better if none of us asked for more than that. I had believed him completely. I had not asked a single question past that, because he was my son, and because grief had already taken enough of my curiosity that year. I was 68 years old with a bad knee and a heart that had been giving me trouble since spring, and none of that mattered as I crossed the length of that diner in under 5 seconds and put my hand flat against the kitchen door before it could swing shut behind her. Whatever was on the other side of it, I was about to learn that I had believed the wrong version of my own family for a very long time. I did not know yet how much that mistake had already cost, or how much more it was still going to take before the night was over. I did not know yet that the room behind that door had been someone's entire world for 4 months. I only knew I had to get through it. I did not know yet either that this small storage room, more than any lawyer's office or hospital hallway I would sit in later that year, was where the truth actually started. The kitchen hit me first with noise. 2 cooks calling numbers back and forth over a ticket rail, a dishwasher running somewhere behind a stainless counter, a radio playing low under all of it. Nobody stopped what they were doing to look at a 68-year-old man who had just pushed through a door marked "Employees Only." In a kitchen that busy, one more person moving fast barely registers. I did not stop to explain myself to anyone. I moved past a rack of clean plates and around a cook plating something at the pass until I reached the narrow gap between the walk-in cooler and a shelf of dry goods. I spotted her at the end of a row of shelving pressed back against a stack of canned tomatoes, both hands wrapped around her stomach. She was breathing too fast, the way a person breathes when they are trying to disappear by sheer will alone. Ren. I kept my voice low. I did not know yet what I was walking into, only that raising my voice would make it worse. It's Emery. Just Emery. She shook her head hard enough that a strand of hair came loose. You need to go back out front, Mr. Voss, please. I can't do this right now. You're shaking. I'm fine. Her voice cracked on the second word. I just need you to leave. I took 1 step closer, both hands open at my sides, the way you approach something that might bolt. I am not here to drag you back to Holt. I did not even know you were carrying a child until 30 seconds ago. That stopped her breathing for 1 full second. Her eyes fixed on mine somewhere between terror and a kind of exhausted hope I recognized, because I had worn that same look myself 3 years earlier, standing outside a hospital room. You, her family. The question came from behind me. I had felt someone else in the kitchen since the moment I pushed through the door, but I had not turned to look yet. A woman in her 50s stepped out from behind the prep station, an apron tied twice around a compact frame, the kind of person who has run a kitchen long enough to read a room in under 3 seconds. Father-in-law, I said. She studied me the way you study a plank of wood before you decide whether it will hold weight. Then she untied her own apron, hung it on a hook without looking, and said, "Come with me." Her name was Delphine Ruiz. I learned that much before we had gone 10 feet. She led us past the dish pit and a walk-in cooler down a short hallway that smelled like cardboard, and opened a door I would never have noticed from the dining room. The room was small enough that the three of us standing in it made it feel crowded. There was a folding cot against one wall, made up neatly with a flannel blanket. A milk crate turned upside down beside it, serving as a nightstand with a phone charger and a half-empty water bottle on top, along with a small bottle of prenatal vitamins and a folded flyer for a free clinic in Boone. A single coat hook on the wall, holding a winter jacket, and one change of clothes in a plastic grocery bag. And on the pillow, a composition notebook with a cover worn soft at the corners. I did not say anything for a long moment. I did not know yet what was written inside that notebook, only that Wren's hand moved toward it the second she sat down on the edge of the cot, the way a person reaches for the one thing in a room that still belongs entirely to them. She came in back in June. Delphine said, her voice flat in the way of someone who had decided facts were kinder than feelings right now. Knocked on the delivery door at 6 in the morning, asking if I needed kitchen help. I could see she was pregnant. Asked her how far along. How far along was she? I said, in June. About 3 months. Delphine paused. She'd been sleeping in her car for 2 weeks before that. Something went out of my chest that I did not have a word for yet. I gave her the storage room, Delphine went on. Gave her the job. She works hard, never complains, never asks for more than what she's earned. She looked at Wren, not at me, when she said the last part. And she made me promise not to tell anyone she was here. Why didn't you call someone yourself? I asked. Family, a shelter, anyone. Delphine crossed her arms. Because it wasn't my secret to tell Mr. Voss. It still isn't far, as I'm concerned. She earns every bit of that cot. 6 shifts a week, and she hasn't missed one, not even the week her due date moved up. Wren had not looked up once. She sat on the edge of the cot, with both hands pressed flat against her belly, staring at a fixed point on the floor between us. The posture of a woman who had already used up every tear she had a long time ago. The notebook on the cot beside her had shifted when she sat down. For half a second, I caught the top of the open page before she pulled it flat against her side. 2 words in careful handwriting. Dear one. I did not ask what came after them. Something told me I was not supposed to know yet. Wren. My voice came out rougher than I intended. You have been sleeping in your car, pregnant, and none of us knew. Does Holt know you're here? I asked. She shook her head once sharp. No, and you are not going to tell him. I did not say I was going to. You're already thinking about it. Her eyes were dry, but there was something raw underneath the steadiness. Please, Mr. Voss. Not yet. She finally lifted her eyes to mine. When she spoke, her voice was steady in a way that cost her something to hold on to. You shouldn't be here, Mr. Voss. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the curve of her stomach, and said it again, quieter this time, like she was reminding herself rather than me. You shouldn't be here. I did not know yet that the story she was about to tell me would answer one question and open 3 more in its place. I only knew I was not leaving that room until I heard it. I dragged the single plastic chair over from the corner and sat down across from her, close enough that our knees nearly touched. Start from the beginning, I said. Not for me, for yourself. Say it out loud to someone who is actually listening. Wren pressed her lips together. Her chin trembled once hard, and then she locked it down the way a person does when they have been holding something in for a very long time. It did not happen all at once, she said finally. You do not wake up one day and decide to become someone your husband cannot recognize. It happens in pieces, small enough that you tell yourself you are imagining it every single time you notice one. Start earlier than that, I said. Start with how you met him. She almost smiled. A hardware store on Main Street. He was buying finish nails for a project he would not tell me about. I was buying paint I could not afford. He offered to cover it. I told him I did not need charity from a stranger. A short breath, not quite a laugh. He told me it was not charity. It was strategy. He wanted my number and cash was cheaper than flowers. That sounds like him. But I thought so too. She looked down at her hands. We dated for 4 months before he brought me to meet you and Corinne. I was so nervous I laughed at every joke you made that night, even the ones that weren't funny. You asked me about the shop before we even sat down for dinner, I said. I remember thinking it was unusual. Most people your age want to talk about anything except a 60-something man's furniture business. I wanted to know everything, she said. The history of it, your grandfather, what the shop had been through. I remember, I said. You held his hand under the table like you were afraid the evening might disappear. Something crossed her face, gone before I could name it. I was afraid of that. I was afraid of a lot of things that year. What kind of things? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Whatever she had been about to say, she pulled it back at the last second. She did not answer right away. Her eyes went to a spot on the wall behind me instead, the particular stillness of someone deciding how much of the truth a room can hold. Before I answer that, she said slowly, I need you to understand something about why I ever came near your family in the first place. I waited. She started twice and stopped both times, the words catching somewhere before they reached her mouth. I did not fill the silence for her. Some things a person has to say on their own timing, or not at all. When she finally spoke again, it was not about Holt directly. It was about a phone. She reached for an old flip phone on the milk crate, the kind you buy with cash and top up at a gas station, and turned it over once in her hands like she was deciding whether to explain it before I asked. The screen lit up under her fingers. One missed call. No name attached to the number, only digits. She went very still. Who is that? I asked. Nobody. She pressed the button on the side, and the screen went dark. She set the phone face down on the crate, deliberately, the way you set down something that might go off if you are not careful with it. I had caught 3 digits before the screen went dark. Not enough to mean anything yet. Enough that I filed them away without deciding to. Ren. It is not important right now, Mr. Voss. Her voice had changed, gone tighter, the careful evenness from a moment ago replaced by something closer to fear. Please, let me finish the part I was already telling you. I did not press her on the phone. Not yet. I have spent 40 years learning that a person will hand you the truth faster if you let them choose the order they tell it in. All right, I said. Finish. She folded her hands on top of the notebook in her lap. The same one I had glimpsed the top page of a few minutes earlier, and took a breath that shook slightly on the way in. I did not walk into that hardware store by accident, she said. The room felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. What do you mean? I mean, I knew Holt Voss was going to be there before I ever picked out that can of paint. Her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, but the silence of the storage room carried it clean across the space between us. I mean, I had been planning to meet your son for 3 weeks before it happened, and none of it was an accident. Not the hardware store. Not the questions I asked him. Not one single conversation in those first 4 months. Planning it how? I asked. You make it sound like a job interview. It was closer to that than I want to admit. Her jaw tightened. I cannot explain the reason yet, Mr. Voss. I need to tell it in the order I asked you to hear it in. If I start with the reason, you will stop listening to the rest. I am not going anywhere, I said. Order does not matter to me. Only the truth does. It will matter, she said quietly, once you hear it. I sat very still, waiting for the rest of it, because I could see in her face that stopping now would cost her more than finishing would. No, I did not come to him by accident, Mr. Voss. Her voice broke completely on the last word, and the tears she had been holding back since I walked into that kitchen finally came silent and fast, tracking down a face that had spent 4 months refusing to let anyone see this exact moment. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, as if she could push the confession back in now that it was already out in the open air between us. It did not work. Nothing that had just been said in that room could be unsaid. I let the silence sit there for a second, before I asked the only question that mattered. Then why? The kitchen noise outside the storage room had thinned to almost nothing. Whatever crew was left out there had moved on to closing tasks. The clatter of dishes replaced by something quieter farther away. In here, under a single bare bulb, it felt like the rest of the world had agreed to wait. Tell me, my mother, Wren said, has spent most of my life fighting for something she believes was taken from our family a long time ago. Before I was old enough to understand what any of it meant, I already knew the shape of it. A collection of antique furniture, a courtroom, a judge who ruled against us. She has never once in 20 years let herself finish grieving it. I did not say anything. I had learned enough in my 68 years to know that the worst thing you can do to a person mid-confession is interrupt them with your own reaction. So I sat with my hands folded and let her keep going, even though something cold was already settling low in my chest. Every instinct I had built over 4 decades of running a business told me to stop her right there, to ask who her mother was, to start protecting what was mine before I understood what I was protecting it from. I did not do that. Some part of me already understood that whatever came next, I would need to have heard the whole of it before I decided what kind of man I wanted to be about it. She used to tell me about it the way other mothers tell bedtime stories, Wren said. Not to frighten me, to make sure I never forgot. She would say the name Voss the way some people say a diagnosis, something you carry with you into every room whether you want to or not. What did she believe we took? I did not know the details when I was young, just the outline. That your family ended up with something that should have belonged to mine, and that the court sided with you because you had better lawyers and a better name in this county. She paused. I am not telling you this to accuse you of anything, Mr. Voss. I am telling you because it is the reason I ever learned your son's name in the first place. Go on. About a year before I met Holt, my mother asked me to do something for her. She had heard through people who still talk to people who still talk to your family that Voss Restoration kept its old paperwork, provenance records, appraisal documents, things going back decades stored somewhere in the shop nobody outside the family ever saw. Wren's hands tightened around the notebook in her lap. She wanted to know what was in those records. She thought there might be something in them that could reopen the case if the right person could get close enough to look. The cold in my chest had a shape now. And you were the right person. I was young. I did not have a career yet or a mortgage or anything that made me feel like I belonged anywhere in particular. And I had grown up believing my mother had been wronged. When she asked me to find a way into your family, it did not feel like a betrayal. It felt like helping. How were you supposed to get close to us? However I could. She did not care if it took a month or 2 years. She told me patience was the only thing that mattered, that people who rush these things get caught, and people who wait get invited in the front door. Wren's voice had gone flat, reciting something she had clearly turned over in her mind 1,000 times since. I found out Holt bought hardware supplies at the same store every other Saturday. I made sure I was there often enough that running into him would not look planned. I thought about the version of that story Holt had told us at dinner 4 years earlier, laughing, calling it fate. I thought about how many times since then I had repeated that story myself at church at the shop, to customers who asked how my son met his wife. I had told it like it was the nicest thing that ever happened to our family. Somewhere in the retelling of it over and over, I had turned a woman's first calculated move into the origin story of my son's happiness. I did not know yet whether that made the story less true or only more complicated than I had ever imagined it could be. For the first few weeks, Ren went on. I told myself I was only doing what my mother asked. Get close. Get invited to the house. Find a reason to be near the archive room eventually. I had a whole plan for how I would ask to see old photographs, family history, anything that would put me near those file boxes without raising questions. And did you get near them? She shook her head slowly. Not the way I meant to. Because somewhere in those first 2 months, it stopped being a plan I was executing and became a life I actually wanted. Her voice cracked slightly on the word wanted. Holt was patient with me in a way nobody in my life had ever been. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He remembered things I mentioned once, weeks later. I started making excuses to see him that had nothing to do with my mother's case at all. When did you tell her you were changing your mind? I did not, Ren said. I kept stalling, kept telling her I needed more time to earn your trust. Some of that was true. Most of it was me trying to buy enough room to figure out how to walk away from what I had started, without either of you finding out what I had started it for. Her hand went still on the notebook. I want you to understand something, Mr. Voss. I never once went looking through your family's private records. Not one file, not one box, not one afternoon alone in that shop when I could have. By the time I had the chance, I did not want what my mother wanted anymore. I wanted the family I had actually found by accident underneath the plan. Then what went wrong? Ren's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes dropped to her hands, and for the first time since she had started talking, she did not seem to know how to shape the next sentence. And that is the part, she said quietly, that I do not know how to tell you yet. I did not push her. Whatever came next in that story, it was clear she needed to reach it on her own terms, in her own time, and I had already learned more in that storage room in the last hour than I had in 4 months of not asking a single question. Ren did not speak again for almost a full minute. When she finally did, her voice had changed, gone quieter and more careful, the way a person sounds when they are handling something they know will break if they are not gentle with it. It was a Tuesday in June, she said. I remember because I had worked a double that day, and my feet were swollen before I even got home. Holt was already there when I walked in, sitting at the kitchen table with a box of my old things spread out in front of him. What kind of things? Notes. A planner from that first year before I threw most of it away. And one page I had forgotten I still had folded into the back of an old journal. Notes I had written to myself about the archive room, about how to ask to see it without sounding like I was asking, about patience being the only thing that mattered. She swallowed hard. I do not know how he found it. I never told him where I kept that box. I felt something shift in my own chest. A slow readjustment of everything I thought I understood about the last several months. What did he say? Nothing at first. He just looked at me when I came through the door, and I knew immediately before either of us said a single word that whatever we had built was already over. He held the page up. He did not raise his voice. He never does when it matters most. Wren's hand pressed flat against her sternum, as if she could still feel exactly where the weight of that moment had landed. He asked me one question. Was any of it real? What did you tell him? I told him yes. All of it except the first few weeks. I told him the plan died a long time before he ever found that page that I had been trying for months to figure out how to tell him the truth without losing him. Her voice cracked. He did not believe me. Or maybe he did, and it did not matter anymore because the damage was the same either way. She was quiet for a moment, gathering herself before the hardest part. He did not yell. He did not accuse me of anything I had not already accused myself of 100 times. Wren's fingers found the edge of the notebook and rubbed along it once, twice, a small, repetitive motion I would come to recognize much later as something Holt did too at his workbench whenever a sentence would not come out right. He just stood there for a moment, long enough that I thought he might say something else. Something about how it felt to find out, or what he wanted from me now. He never did. I think he had decided that saying more would only prove how much he had believed before he found that page. He stood up, put the page back in the box, and set his key to the apartment on the table between us. Then he left. He did not slam the door. I think that was somehow worse than if he had. I thought about my son standing in that kitchen, choosing silence over every version of the conversation that would have let either of them start repairing something. It was such a familiar choice that it made my chest ache. I had made the same one myself more than once with people who mattered a great deal more than a rented apartment key. I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over, watching it fail to match the story I had been carrying in my head for 4 months. My son had not thrown a pregnant woman out of his life with a lie and a locked door. My son had learned the truth, quietly absorbed it without a single accusation, and walked away with more restraint than most men could manage in a moment like that. He left that night, I said slowly, and told none of us why. He would not have told you the reason without telling you what I had done first, Wren said. And I do not think he wanted anyone to know that part. Not because he was protecting me. Because admitting it happened meant admitting he had missed it for months. I think that embarrassed him more than the betrayal did. When did you find out about the baby? 3 weeks later. Her hand moved to her stomach, an unconscious gesture I had already watched her make a dozen times that night without registering it. I sat in a clinic waiting room by myself and stared at a strip of paper until the second line stopped being something I could argue myself out of seeing. You did not call him. I picked up the phone 11 times that week. I never once finished dialing. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I had followed her through that kitchen door, her eyes were not full of fear. They were full of something closer to exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a decision so long it has worn a groove into you. What was I supposed to say? Mr. Voss, congratulations, the woman who lied her way into your family for money is now carrying your grandchild. I did not think there was a version of that sentence he could hear without it confirming every reason he already had to walk away for good. So instead, you disappeared. I did not disappear at first. I tried to find work near enough to reach out eventually once I had something to offer besides an apology. A job, a place to live that was not a car. Her voice thinned. It just took longer than I expected. And the longer it took, the harder it became to imagine any version of reaching out that did not sound like I was using the baby the same way my mother wanted me to use Holt in the first place. I thought about that for a long moment, the terrible symmetry of it. A woman so afraid of repeating her mother's exact sin that she had let the fear talk her into a different, quieter version of the same isolation. There was a particular cruelty to it, the more I turned it over. She had spent her whole life resenting a woman who treated other people's pain as leverage only to become so afraid of becoming her that she chose silence and distance instead of the one honest conversation that might have saved everything. Both paths in their own way had cost her the person who might have forgiven her enough to matter. "Ren," I said finally, "why did you not come back and find him or find me?" She did not answer right away. Her hand pressed flat against the curve of her stomach, and she looked down at it instead of at me, the way a person looks at the one thing in a room they still fully trust. The silence went on long enough that I understood, before she said another word, that whatever came next was going to be worse than everything she had told me so far. Ren sat with her hand still pressed against her stomach for what felt like a long time before she finally spoke. When she did, her voice had none of the careful control from a few minutes earlier. It sounded like something that had been held shut for months, finally giving way. "My mother is dying, Mr. Voss." She said it the way you set down something heavy you have been carrying too long in one arm. Flat, careful. Like the weight of the sentence itself might do damage if she let it fall wrong. "Ovarian cancer, stage 4. She is known since March, and she did not tell me until July because she said she did not want me making decisions out of pity." "How long does she have?" "The doctors will not give her an exact number. Neither will she when I ask. What she will say is that she does not intend to spend whatever time is left waiting for a courtroom to fix something a courtroom already refused to fix once." Ren's jaw tightened. "She has never been the kind of woman who waits for anything to happen on its own. You said she wrote you a letter." Ren reached into the back cover of the composition notebook, where I had noticed a folded paper tucked against the cardboard the first time she opened it. "She wrote me a letter in August. I have read it so many times I could recite it from memory, but I want you to read it yourself. I do not think you would believe me otherwise." She held it out. My hands were not entirely steady when I took it. The paper had been folded and refolded enough times that the creases had gone soft, almost furred the way cloth wears down before it finally tears. I unfolded it under the single bare bulb overhead and began to read. "Smartinten. The doctor says I likely have until spring, maybe less. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you because there is no more time left for either of us to keep pretending we do not know what has to be done. You are the only one who can still make this right. 20 years I have carried what that family took from us, and I refuse to go to my grave having failed to get it back. The child changes everything. A grandchild born into the Voss family is the only leverage strong enough to make them finally listen to reason. Use it, Ren. Use him or her, whichever it turns out to be. I am not asking you to put the baby in harm's way. I am asking you to let the truth of who that family really is finally cost them something. If you do this one thing for me, I can go. Knowing your grandfather's name means something again. If you do not, I am afraid everything I gave up trying to get it back will have been for nothing at all. Love, Mom." I read it twice. The second time slower than the first, as though a different pace might change what the words were asking for. I did not look up right away. My eyes stayed on the last line of the letter on the ink pressed hard enough into the paper that it had almost broken through in places. Somewhere down the hallway, the dishwasher cycled into its rinse phase, a long mechanical exhale. The bare bulb overhead ticked faintly as it warmed. My own hand holding the letter had gone completely still, stiller than it had been in months, stiller than it had any right to be. Her name is Loretta, Ren said quietly, watching my face the way you watch a door you are not sure will open or slam shut. Loretta Hargrove. She raised me on her own after my father left, and everything she has left in this world she has decided belongs to a fight that started before I was even born. What exactly does she believe we took from her? I do not know the whole of it. She has never told me the details, only the shape of her anger about it. Something about a collection your family ended up owning that hers believed should have stayed theirs. A court sided with you decades ago, before either of us existed, to have an opinion about it. Ren shook her head slowly. I used to think that made it simple. Someone won, someone lost, that was the end of it. She has never once let it be the end of it. I set the letter down on the milk crate beside the flip phone carefully, the way you set down something that has already proven it can hurt someone. I did not say anything for a long moment, turning the shape of it over in my mind. Not just what Loretta wanted, but what kind of desperation makes a mother ask her own daughter to weaponize a grandchild neither of them had ever met. It was the kind of thing I could not have imagined 3 years ago, before grief taught me exactly how far a person can stretch themselves once they understand they are running out of time to fix what actually matters to them. That is why I ran, Ren said when the silence had stretched long enough that she needed to fill it. Not just from Holt, from her too. I could not tell your family the truth without giving her exactly what she was asking for, and I could not go home to her without becoming the kind of person she has spent 20 years trying to turn me into. And does she know you are here at this diner in this town? No. She thinks I am still somewhere near Asheville working odd jobs, deciding whether to do what she asked. Ren's voice had gone flat again, the exhaustion showing through. I stopped taking her calls in September. That flip phone is how people from home still try to reach me when they try at all. I looked at the folded letter sitting on the crate, at the careful, deliberate handwriting of a dying woman who had decided her own grandchild was a tool before she had ever met him. She wanted you to use my grandson, I said slowly, as leverage in a lawsuit that ended before you were born. Yes, and instead you disappeared, from both of us. I did not know what else to do that would not turn him into exactly what she wanted him to be. Ren's voice had gone very quiet. A weapon before he ever had a chance to be a person. I understood sitting there in that storage room with a dying woman's letter on a milk crate between us, that I had walked into that diner believing I was looking for one missing member of my family. I was not. I was looking at a woman running from 2 families at once, both of them in their own different ways, willing to use the same unborn child to settle debts that had nothing to do with him. I thought about the rocking chair sitting unfinished on my workbench, the one I had spent 3 weeks slow walking for no reason. I had let myself examine too closely. I thought about how strange it was, sitting in that small room, to realize the child that chair had quietly been waiting for was about to be born into a war on 2 fronts before he ever drew his first breath, and that both sides of it believed in their own way that they were only trying to protect something. The bare bulb overhead had not stopped its faint ticking, and somewhere down the hallway, the dishwasher had cycled into a second load. I set my own hands flat on my knees, steadying myself for whatever came next. You said your mother has a lawyer, I said. The one on the phone that lit up earlier tonight before you shut it off. Ren's shoulders tightened. She had known, I think, that I would circle back to it eventually. Some questions do not disappear just because you set them aside for a while. His name is Porter Ainsley, she said. He has handled my mother's affairs for almost as long as I can remember. Estate matters mostly until this year. Now he calls himself her trust attorney, which is a nicer way of saying he is the one trying to make her letter into something a court would actually have to take seriously. I had known men like that in 40 years of running a business. Careful, patient, the kind who never raised their voice because they had learned raising it only gave the other side something to point to later. Men like that were far more dangerous than the ones who shouted. That was him on the phone. Yes. She said it like an admission she had been avoiding since the moment the screen lit up. He has been calling for 6 weeks. Not every day. Often enough that I started recognizing the number before I stopped answering it at all. What does he want? A meeting. He calls it that every time like it is something ordinary. A meeting to discuss my mother's wishes regarding her grandchild's future. That is the phrase he used the first time, and he has not changed it since no matter how many times I have hung up on him. Wren's hands had gone still on the notebook in her lap. He is very careful with his language, Mr. Voss. Everything he says sounds reasonable if you do not know what it is actually asking for. And what is it actually asking for? Documentation, she said. Establishing paternity formally on paper with your family's name attached to it. Once that exists, my mother has something concrete to build a claim around. Not against Holt directly. Against the estate. Against whatever the Voss family might eventually leave behind for a grandchild who shares blood with both families. She looked up at me. I do not fully understand the legal architecture of it. I only understand that Porter has spent 6 weeks trying to get me into a room with him, and every instinct I have told me not to let that happen until I had somewhere safe to stand first. What exactly would that documentation require? A birth certificate naming Holt as father. A paternity test if he contested it, though I do not think he would. Wren's voice had gone clinical, the way people sound when they have rehearsed something painful enough times that the mechanics of it stop hurting more than the substance does. Once that paperwork exists, Porter says my mother's attorneys can argue the child has a legitimate financial interest in the Voss estate, present or future. It does not matter to them whether Holt and I are together. It only matters that the child is provably his. I sat with that for a moment, turning over the shape of what she was describing. A dying woman's lawyer patient, and careful working the edges of a situation that had not even fully happened yet, laying groundwork for a claim built on a child who was not even born. Has he ever threatened you directly? Not in words I could repeat to a judge, if that is what you are asking. Wren's jaw tightened. He says things like it would be a shame if this had to become adversarial. He says my mother does not have much time left to see this resolved peacefully. He says a lot of things that sound like concern and mean something closer to a countdown. Can you give me an example, his exact words, if you remember them? Wren closed her eyes briefly, the way a person does when they are retrieving something they wish they could forget instead. The last call before I stopped picking up entirely, he said, Wren, I have watched a lot of families destroy themselves waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment. There is only before your mother passes and after. I would hate for you to choose after. She opened her eyes. He said it very gently. That was the worst part. He was not angry. He genuinely believed he was being kind to me. A countdown to what? To whatever happens once she runs out of time to do this her way. Wren's voice thinned. I do not know exactly what that looks like. I only know Porter has made it very clear every time he calls that patience is not something either of them has much of anymore. I thought about the letter still sitting folded on the milk crate between us, about the particular cruelty of building a legal strategy around a grandchild instead of simply meeting him. I thought too about the fact that I had spent 40 years learning how to read a contract before I signed it, how to recognize when patience on the other side of a table was strategy rather than kindness. Porter Ainsley was not the first careful, unhurried man I had ever sat across from. He would not be the last either if I had anything to do with it. Yeah, how much time does she actually have? I asked. Not what the doctors told her. What Porter has told you when he was not being careful with his language. Wren was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, something in her posture had changed, gone very still and precise, the way people get when they are finally saying the thing they have been avoiding longest. He let it slip once about 3 weeks ago. He was trying to pressure me into the meeting, and he said something he probably regretted the second it left his mouth. He said my mother's oncologist had stopped talking about treatment options entirely and had started talking about comfort instead. She swallowed. That is the word doctors use, I have learned, when they have stopped trying to buy someone more time and started trying to make the time that is left easier. I did not say anything. I did not trust my voice to hold steady if I tried. So to answer your question, Mr. Voss, Wren said quietly, the doctors say months. Porter's version of months, the one he let slip when he thought he was winning, sounded a great deal shorter than that. I did not leave Wren at the Copper Kettle that night. Delphine helped me arrange a room at a small inn off Route 321, paid in cash, under a name that was not hers or mine, and I did not go home myself until I had watched the light come on behind her window and stay on long enough to know she meant to actually sleep. The next night I could not. I drove to the shop instead of the house the way I sometimes did when Elmwood felt too quiet to sit inside of. Voss Restoration sat dark and still on Sunset Drive, the front windows reflecting the streetlight instead of showing anything inside. I let myself in through the side door, the one that still stuck slightly if you did not lift the handle just right, and did not bother turning on the overhead lights. The single lamp over my workbench was enough. The rocking chair was still there, walnut missing its right runner, exactly where I had left it 3 weeks earlier. I did not go to it. I went instead to the shelf above the workbench where I kept a wooden box that had belonged to Corinne. The kind of box every marriage seems to accumulate without either person deciding to start it. Photographs, ticket stubs, a pressed flower from a garden neither of us could remember the name of anymore. I had moved it to the shop after she passed, because I could not bring myself to open it in the house, and I could not bring myself to throw it away either. It had sat on that shelf for 3 years, gathering the particular kind of dust that settles on things nobody touches on purpose. I opened it that night, because I did not know what else to do with my hands. Most of what was inside I had seen before in the weeks right after the funeral, when going through her things had felt like the only useful thing I was capable of doing. Recipe cards in her handwriting, a church bulletin from our wedding. But near the bottom, folded into quarters and tucked beneath a stack of birthday cards, was a letter I did not remember ever seeing. It was addressed to me. It had never been sealed. Emery. I do not know if I will ever give you this. I have started it 4 times and thrown it away 3, and I suspect this copy will not survive either, but I need to write it down somewhere, even if only to prove to myself I thought it clearly enough to put into words. I have never told you I doubted the Hargrove case. You handled the business end of it, and I stayed out of it the way I stayed out of most things at the shop. But I sat through enough of it to notice things you did not have time to notice. The way your father's lawyer handled certain documents. The way the timeline never quite matched what Loretta herself said, back when she still spoke to me at all. I told myself it was not my place to ask questions about something that was settled before I fully understood it. I think about her more than I let on. I think about what it cost her win or lose to lose the friendship, along with the argument. I am not saying we were wrong, Emery. I do not know that we were wrong. I am saying I never let myself finish finding out. And some nights that not knowing sits heavier on me than almost anything else in this house. If you are reading this, it means I finally worked up the nerve to hand it to you directly, which means we are probably sitting at the kitchen table and you are probably wondering why I look like I am about to cry over nothing. I promise you, it is not nothing. Love always, Corinne. I read it twice the way I had read Loretta's letter the night before, as though a slower pace might change what the words were asking of me. It did not. My wife had died carrying a doubt she never once spoke aloud to me, not in 31 years of marriage. Not even when Loretta's name came up at dinner. Not even in the last months when she must have known better than anyone that time was running out to say the things that mattered. I set the letter on the workbench and kept going through the box because stopping there felt like leaving a job half-finished, and I have never been able to walk away from a job half-finished. Near the bottom, beneath a stack of ticket stubs from a theater that had closed years ago, I found a photograph. It was old enough that the color had shifted toward yellow at the edges the way film does after 2 decades in a box. A younger Corinne, 20-something, laughing at something outside the frame, standing beside another young woman at what looked like an outdoor market or auction tables of furniture and glassware visible behind them both. The second woman had her arm looped through Corinne's, the easy familiarity of people who had known each other a long time. I turned the photograph over. On the back in Corinne's handwriting faded but legible L, and me, the day we found the walnut chair. I sat down on the stool at my workbench, because my legs asked me to. Corinne had known Loretta Hargrove, not as an adversary in a lawsuit that came later. As a friend, close enough to be photographed with her arm through Corinne's, at what must have been an antique auction, years before any of it turned into a courtroom. I did not know when the photograph was taken. I did not know how long the friendship lasted, or what exactly broke it, or whether it broke before the lawsuit or because of it. I did know that the woman writing a letter asking my daughter-in-law to weaponize my grandson was not in fact a stranger to my family at all. She had once stood close enough to my wife to be captured, laughing in the same frame on the day, if the handwriting on the back was accurate, that someone had found the very chair I still had not finished repairing on my workbench 3 feet away. I looked over at the chair now sitting half-finished under the lamp and felt something shift in how I understood it. I had told myself for 3 weeks that I was simply behind on the work. I wondered now whether some part of me had known without letting myself know it plainly that finishing it meant finally reckoning with everything it was quietly attached to. I put the photograph back where I had found it, in the same order, beneath the same ticket stubs, the way you return something, to exactly where it belongs when you are not yet ready to decide what it means. I did not bring it home with me that night. Some things need to sit a little longer before you are ready to carry them. Instead, I picked up my phone and called a number I had not dialed in 18 years. It rang 3 times before a voice I still recognized, older and rougher than I remembered it, answered on the other end. "Gideon Marsh." "Gideon," I said. "It's Emery Voss. I know it's late. I need 5 minutes of your time, and I owe you a great deal more than that first." Gideon agreed to see me the following afternoon. That gave me 1 full day to get through first, and I spent most of the morning of it exactly where I had spent the night before at the shop, moving pieces of furniture from one side of the workroom to the other, without any particular reason for doing so. I did not expect Holt. The bell over the front door was not something Holt himself had ever much cared for, an old brass thing his grandfather had installed decades earlier, and nobody had gotten around to removing since. But it rang anyway when the door opened just after 11 that morning, and I looked up from the workbench to find my son standing in the doorway with his jacket still on, as though he had not fully decided whether he meant to stay. "Dad." "Holt." I set down the chisel I had been holding without using. "I did not expect you until Thursday. I finished the Ashland job early." He came in the rest of the way, letting the door swing shut behind him, and looked around the workroom the way he always did when he first walked in, a habit from childhood, cataloging what had changed since he had last been there. Thought I would stop by and see what needed doing before the weekend. His eyes caught on something near the register before I could redirect them. A yellow legal pad half covered by an invoice with Gideon's name and a time written on it in my own handwriting. I had meant to put it away and had not gotten around to it, the same way I had not gotten around to a number of things in the last 2 days. "Who's Gideon?" Holt asked, nodding toward the pad. "Well, an old contact," I said. "Something for tomorrow?" "Nothing that needs your attention." He looked at me for a second longer than the answer required, then let it go the way you let go of a thread when pulling on it does not yet seem worth the trouble. I told myself that was the end of it. "Nothing urgent at the shop," I said, eager to move the conversation away from the pad. You did not need to come in early for that." "I know I didn't need to." He set his keys down on the counter near the register, the same spot he had set them down in 1,000 times before, and his eyes moved past me to the workbench, to the rocking chair still sitting exactly where it had been for 3 weeks, still missing its right runner. "That's still not done. I have been slow on it." "You've never been slow on anything in your life, Dad." He said it lightly, almost like a joke, but his eyes stayed on the chair a beat longer than the comment needed. "You finish things. That's kind of your whole personality." I did not have a good answer for that, so I did not try to give him one. I picked the chisel back and turned my attention to a joint that did not, strictly speaking, need my attention at all. I watched him out of the corner of my eye while I worked the way a father does when he is pretending not to. He had his mother's habit of pacing when he was thinking something through, though he would have denied it if I had said so out loud. He had my habit too, the one I had never noticed until that morning, of needing his hands occupied with something while his mind worked on something else entirely. Holt did not leave. He wandered the workroom the way he sometimes did, running a hand along the edge of a cabinet we had refinished the week before, checking the tension on a clamp that did not need checking, the restless movement of a man filling time while he decided whether to say what he had actually come to say. "You look tired," he said finally. "I have not been sleeping well." "Since when?" "A few days," I said, which was true enough not to be a lie, even if it left out most of what mattered. Holt stopped near the workbench, close enough now that I could see him studying my face the way he used to study a joint before deciding whether it would hold under load. It was a habit he had picked up from me, I realized watching him do it. I had taught him that without ever meaning to teach him anything at all. "You've got that look Mom used to get," he said. "Right before she'd tell me everything was fine, and it very much was not fine. I am not your mother, Holt." "No," he agreed. "But you learned some things from her too, apparently." I set the chisel down again, more deliberately this time, and made myself meet his eyes. 40 years of running a business had taught me that the moment you start avoiding a direct question is the moment the other person stops believing anything else you say, true or not. There is nothing wrong that concerns you," I said, which was, I understood even as I said it, the exact kind of sentence a person says right before it turns out to concern the other person a great deal. Holt's jaw tightened, the smallest movement barely visible if you were not looking for it. He reached over to the edge of the workbench and picked up a scrap of sandpaper that had been sitting there since the previous week and began rubbing it along the corner of the bench. Slow, even strokes back and forth, the same motion I had watched Wren describe to me 2 nights earlier, without either of us knowing at the time that we were describing the same habit in 2 different people. "You know I hate it when you do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Decide something's too big to tell me, and then tell me it's nothing in a tone that makes it very clear it is not nothing." He kept working the sandpaper along the wood, not looking at me now, looking instead at the motion of his own hand. I've watched you do it my whole life. Usually with Mom standing between us, smoothing it over, before either of us had to actually say anything true. Holt. Mom's not here to smooth it over anymore, Dad. He finally looked up. Whatever had been careful and light in his voice a few minutes earlier was gone. Same steadiness I had seen once before, in a different version of him in a kitchen 4 months ago, with a woman he had loved, and a page of handwritten notes he had never expected to find. So I am just going to ask you plainly, and I would like you to actually answer me this time, instead of managing me. He set the sandpaper down. You are keeping something from me. I do not know what it is yet. But I know you, Dad, better than you seem to remember I do, and whatever it is not nothing. I looked at my son standing there with a scrap of sandpaper in his hand and a question in his eyes that he had every right to ask, and I understood all at once that I had run out of versions of the truth I was willing to withhold from him. Sit down, I said. I don't want to sit down. I want you to answer me. Holt. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Sit down. Please. Something in the please must have reached him, because he pulled a stool out from the workbench and sat slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. I stood across from him, the same rocking chair between us that had sat unfinished for 3 weeks, and I understood that whatever I said next was going to change the shape of both our lives before I finished saying it. 3 nights ago, I said I was having dinner at the Copper Kettle, the same diner your mother and I used to go to before she passed. I know the place. A waitress came out of the kitchen, pregnant, far enough along that there was no mistaking it. I made myself keep going because I had learned over the last 3 days that stopping partway through a hard sentence only made the rest of it harder to finish. It was Ren Holt. The color went out of his face slowly, the way it does when a person is trying and failing to find a version of what they just heard that makes more sense than the one that was actually said. That's not possible, he said. She left months ago. You know that. Everyone knows that. She did not leave Holt. You left. He stopped. Whatever he had been about to say collapsed somewhere between his chest and his mouth. I know what happened between the two of you, I said. She told me. The plan her mother sent her in with. The page you found. All of it. I am not defending what she did before she met you. I am telling you what happened after, because you do not know it, and it is not fair to you or to her that you do not. Now after, he repeated very quietly like the word itself was dangerous. She found out she was pregnant 3 weeks after you left, I said. She did not know how to tell you. She did not think you would believe her, or that you would want to hear it even if you did. She has been working double shifts at that diner for 4 months, Holt. She was sleeping in her car before that. She has a storage room behind the kitchen with a cot in it, and a notebook full of things she has been writing down for a child she was terrified to tell either of us existed. Holt had gone completely still. The sandpaper was no longer moving in his hand. It had simply stopped mid-motion, forgotten his fingers curled loosely around it, without any pressure behind them at all. You have a son, I said, because there was no way left to say it gently, and gentleness had already cost us 4 months we were never going to get back. Or a daughter. I do not know which yet. But you have a child, Holt, and that child is due any week now, and its mother has been carrying it alone because both of us believed a version of events that was never entirely true. For a moment, something in Holt's face cracked open, and the questions came fast, almost on top of each other, the way they do when a person has been holding perfectly still and then suddenly cannot hold still at all. Is she okay? Is the baby okay? How far along exactly? You said any week. What does that mean? Is she seeing a doctor? Does she have insurance? Where has she actually been sleeping? A storage room? What kind of... He stopped himself, pressing the back of his hand briefly against his mouth, as though he could physically hold the rest of it in. 4 months, Dad. 4 months and nobody knew. I didn't know. I only found out 3 nights ago myself. That is not the point. His voice had gone unsteady in a way I had not heard from him since he was a teenager. The point is, she was out there the whole time. Pregnant. Alone. And I was in my apartment feeling sorry for myself, telling people it didn't work out like it was some kind of... He could not finish the sentence. He did not try again. The workroom was very quiet. Somewhere behind the building, a delivery truck downshifted on the highway, the sound rising and fading over several seconds. Dust hung visible in the shaft of light coming through the high window above the workbench, drifting slow and unbothered, the only thing in the room still moving. Holt's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. I did not fill the silence for him. I had learned that much, at least from a storage room 3 nights earlier, from a woman who had needed the space to reach her own truth, without anyone rushing her toward it. He set the sandpaper down on the workbench carefully, the way you set down something when your hands have stopped entirely trusting themselves to hold it. He stood up. The stool scraped once against the concrete floor, a short, sharp sound that seemed too loud for the size of the room. Holt. He did not answer me. He walked past the workbench, past the rocking chair, past the register where his keys still sat, where he had left them an hour earlier. He picked the keys up without looking at them, the motion entirely automatic, a man's hands doing something his mind had not yet caught up to deciding. The bell over the front door rang once as he opened it. The same brass bell his grandfather had installed decades earlier, the one Holt had never much cared for. It rang a second time, softer, as the door swung shut behind him. I stood at the workbench for a long time after he left. The dust kept drifting in the shaft of light from the high window, slow and indifferent, the way it does whether or not anything in the room around it has just ended. I could hear my own breathing, and beneath it, faint and growing fainter, the sound of Holt's truck starting in the gravel lot outside, then pulling away, the engine noise thinning into the general hum of the highway, until there was nothing left of it at all. I did not know, standing there in the sudden silence of my own shop, whether I had just given my son the truth he deserved, or whether I had simply handed him a weight too large to carry, and watched him walk out the door with it before either of us had any idea where he intended to put it down. All I knew for certain was that the version of my family I had believed in 3 days earlier no longer existed, and whatever came next would have to be built out of whatever was actually true, rather than whatever had simply been easiest to believe. Holt told me weeks later that he drove for almost 4 hours that night without any destination in mind. Up into the mountains past grandfather, along roads that turned to gravel and then back to pavement again, until the truck's headlights were the only light for miles in either direction. He said he pulled over twice. Once because his hands were shaking too badly to keep the wheel steady, and once because he needed to sit in the dark and hear nothing at all for a while, no engine, no radio, nothing but his own breathing and the tick of the cooling hood. He told me later that somewhere on that second stop, sitting in the dark, with the window cracked, and the mountain air coming in cold around him, he had tried to picture the child. Not a fact on a page, not a sentence I had said to him across a workbench, but an actual person, small and specific, already moving through the world without him. He said it was the first time in 4 months that his anger at Ren had felt smaller than something else entirely. He did not yet have a word for what that something else was. He would find one eventually. That night he only knew it hurt in a different place than the anger had. I did not know any of that at the time. At the time, I only knew that my son had walked out of my shop without a word, and that I had an appointment of my own to keep one I had made before I understood how much the ground beneath both of us was about to shift. Gideon's shop sat on a cinder-block lot off Highway 321, a hand-painted sign above the roll-up door reading Marsh Fine Repair, one letter in repair, faded almost past reading. I had not been inside it in 18 years. I had not needed a reason to avoid it for most of that time. I simply had. He was under a car when I arrived, only his boots and the cuffs of his coveralls visible from the doorway. He rolled out on the creeper at the sound of the bell, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and looked at me for a long moment without saying anything at all. "Emery Voss," he said finally. Not warm, not cold either. Just a fact stated. "Gideon, thank you for seeing me." He gestured toward a metal desk in the back office, two mismatched chairs, a coffee maker that looked older than either of us. He did not offer coffee. He sat behind the desk and folded his hands and waited the posture of a man who had learned a long time ago that some conversations go better when you let the other person do the work of starting them. "I was wrong about you," I said. 18 years ago, when I let you go over the Hargrove file, I told myself the evidence pointed at you, because you were the newest name on the list of people who had access. The truth is, I never looked hard enough to know where it actually pointed. I let a lawyer push me toward the fastest answer instead of the right one. Gideon's expression did not change, but something in his shoulders settled slightly, the particular stillness of a man hearing a sentence he had waited a long time to hear. "That apology is about 16 years past when it would have changed anything that mattered to my life," he said slowly. "But I appreciate you saying it to my face instead of sending it through somebody else. That's fair." He reached into the bottom drawer of the desk without breaking eye contact, the motion of a man who had rehearsed this moment more times in his head than he likely wanted to admit, and set a thick manila folder on the desk between us. "I kept a copy," he said, "of everything I pulled together on the Hargrove provenance file before you let me go. I never had anywhere useful to put it. Figured I would know when the day came that it mattered again." I looked at the folder without touching it yet. "How did you know it would matter again?" "I didn't exactly. I just never believed that case was as settled as your father's lawyers wanted everybody to believe." He pushed it another inch closer to me. "There's a woman named Loretta Hargrove who spent 20 years telling anyone who'll listen that the courts got it wrong. Most people around here stopped listening to her a long time ago. I never entirely did." "Why not?" "Because I worked in this shop long enough to see how provenance paperwork actually gets handled around here back before everything went digital. Handshakes, favors, a signature from whoever happened to be standing nearby when a piece needed authenticating, whether or not they had any real business signing it." Gideon shrugged, the gesture of a man who had made his peace with an ugly truth a long time before I had. "Doesn't mean the Voss family stole anything outright. Might just mean the paperwork was never as clean as a courtroom needed it to look." I picked up the folder. It was heavier than I expected, the particular density of paper that has been photocopied and refiled and photocopied again by someone determined not to lose it. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "After everything." Gideon studied me the way he used to study an engine, before deciding whether it was worth the labor to fix. "Because you came here to apologize to me. I'll give you that much, it's more than most men manage." He leaned back in his chair. "But I don't think that's actually why you're here today, Emery. Not the whole reason." "What do you mean?" "I mean somebody in your orbit is caught up in the Hargrove business right now, or you would not be sitting in my shop for the first time in 18 years, asking about a file that has been dead since before your son could drive." He said it plainly, without accusation, the way you state a fact you have already worked out, and are only waiting for the other person to catch up to. So I will ask you straight. Did you come here today because you need this to protect somebody close to you? Or because you personally finally want to know the truth after all these years of being comfortable not knowing it? I did not answer him right away. I sat with the folder heavy in my lap, aware of how easy it would have been, even now, to give him the answer that made me sound better than I was. Gideon Marsh had waited 18 years for an apology he had every right to stop expecting. He deserved better from me than a convenient lie dressed up as an honest one. I drove straight from Gideon's shop to Renata Okafor's office on Sunset Drive, the folder still heavy on the passenger seat beside me, and did not fully unclench my hands from the wheel until I was standing in her doorway. Renata had been a title and provenance researcher in this part of the state for close to 20 years, the kind of specialist most people did not know existed until they needed one, usually in the middle of an estate dispute or an insurance claim that hinged on whether a piece of furniture was actually what someone claimed it to be. Her office occupied the second floor above a bookshop, 2 rooms crowded with filing cabinets and a single large monitor that looked considerably newer than everything around it. I had used her firm once before years earlier to authenticate a set of chairs a customer swore had come from a Charleston estate, and turned out under her examination to have come from a furniture wholesaler outside Hickory instead. She was precise in a way I had come to trust, the kind of precise that did not care whose feelings the truth happened to bruise on its way out. This is a lot of paper," she said when I handed her Gideon's folder. "Give me the afternoon." She spent most of it with the folder spread across her desk, saying very little occasionally, making a small sound that was not quite a word. I sat across from her and let her work the way I had learned to sit still for Wren, for Gideon, for anyone who needed room to reach their own conclusions without me crowding the process. I watched the light through her office window shift from midday flat to late afternoon gold without fully registering the hours passing. It was nearly 5 o'clock when she finally looked up. "Emery," she said, "you need to see this." I came around the desk. She had a single document pulled up on her monitor, a scanned provenance authentication form, the kind that accompanies a piece of furniture through an appraisal and a sale establishing where it came from and who had verified that history was accurate. "This is the authentication for the Walnut collection," Renata said, tracing the screen with the tip of a pen without touching it. "Filed the year before the lawsuit. It is what the court relied on, in part to establish that your family's claim to the pieces was legitimate." "All right. Look at the signature line. Independent authenticator." I leaned closer. The handwriting was faded but legible, a careful looping script I would have recognized anywhere on any document in any lifetime. "Corinne." "That is my wife's signature," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected, the particular flatness of a man working very hard to keep something else from breaking through it. "Topika, I cross-referenced it against your marriage records," Renata said. "Your wedding was the spring before this document was filed, which means, at minimum, she was your fiancée at the time she signed this. Possibly already your wife, depending on the exact month." She looked at me steadily. "An independent authenticator is supposed to be independent, Emery. Someone with no personal stake in whose side of the courtroom the ruling favors. Your future wife signing off on your family's claim does not meet that standard. Not even close." I sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk, the same chair I had used for 20 minutes, without really occupying it. She never told me," I said mostly to myself. 31 years of marriage, and she never once told me she had signed anything. Would it have changed the outcome if she had? I do not know. I thought about the letter in the wooden box on my workbench, the one that had sat there for 3 years, without ever being handed to me. "I have never told you I doubted the Hargrove case. I sat through enough of it to notice things you did not have time to notice." I think she doubted it herself, I think that is exactly what she was trying to tell me in a letter she wrote and never gave me, and I only found it 3 nights ago. In a box I had been too afraid to open properly since the day she died. What did the letter say exactly, if you don't mind my asking? I told her as close to word for word as I could manage. Renata listened with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to weighing evidence, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. That reads to me like a woman who suspected something was not right and never let herself finish finding out, she said. Which is not the same as a confession. But it is not nothing either. Oh no, I agreed. It is not nothing. Renata was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a person who dealt exclusively in verifiable facts and had just watched one turn into something considerably more human than she was accustomed to handling. Choti, I am sorry, Emery, how she said, and she did sound it underneath the professional evenness. I know that is not the same as being sorry about the legal implications. I am sorry about the other part too. I thought about Corinne, sitting through some portion of a lawsuit she had quietly signed her own name into, watching it unfold, never once explaining to anyone, including her own husband, exactly how close to the center of it she had actually stood. I thought about a friendship with a young woman named Loretta, captured once in a photograph at an antique auction that had not survived whatever came after. I understood, sitting in Renata's office with the fluorescent lights humming overhead, that my wife had carried a version of the same silence I had spent my whole life mistaking for strength. It struck me, not for the first time that week, how much damage a family could do simply by deciding generation after generation that certain conversations were not worth having. Corinne had not lied to me, not exactly. She had simply let a truth sit unspoken long enough that it stopped feeling like something she was hiding and started feeling to her like something that had simply never come up. I recognized the shape of that particular self-deception. I had been practicing a version of it myself for 3 years. My phone rang in my jacket pocket. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name on the screen and answered before the second ring. Ren. Her voice came through fast and thin, stripped down to something closer to panic than I had heard from her. Yet even in that storage room 3 nights earlier, "Mr. Voss," she said. "It's Porter. He is not waiting anymore. I need you to come." I broke every reasonable speed limit between Renata's office and the inn off Route 321, and I did not think about a single mile of it until I was already parking in front of Ren's door. She let me in before I finished knocking. She had not changed out of her uniform from an earlier shift, and her hand was pressed flat against her belly in the way I had come to recognize as something closer to bracing than comfort. "Tell me," I said. "Choto, Porter called an hour ago, not asking for a meeting this time." Her voice was tight, controlled in the particular way of someone rationing her own panic, so it would not spend itself before she finished explaining. "He said my mother took a turn yesterday. Bad enough that her oncologist moved up a scan. He said she does not have the months anymore, Mr. Voss. He would not give me a number. He just kept saying the word imminent over and over, like repeating it would make me agree to something faster. What does he want? The same thing he has always wanted. The meeting, the paternity documentation. Except now he is not asking. He told me my mother's legal team is prepared to file for an emergency hearing to establish the child's interest in the estate before she passes, with or without my cooperation. He said it would be easier for everyone, including the baby, if I simply came in voluntarily instead of forcing them to do it the hard way. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs had stopped feeling entirely reliable. Can he actually do that file without your cooperation? I do not know the law well enough to say for certain. He seems to believe he can, or he would not be threatening it. Ren's hands had gone white-knuckled around each other. I am 7.5 months pregnant, Mr. Voss. I do not have the strength left to fight a legal battle I do not understand against a man who has been preparing for it for 6 weeks. I thought about the folder still sitting in my truck, about Corinne's signature on a document that should never have carried it, about 18 years of silence I had just started to undo in a single afternoon. I thought about how much longer I had spent waiting for certainty than actually acting on what I already knew to be true. "We are done waiting," I said. Ren looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have spent 3 days gathering evidence, being patient, letting everyone else set the pace of this. Gideon's file, Renata's findings, all useful, all necessary, and none of it moves fast enough for a woman who does not have months left to wait for it." I stood up, already reaching for my phone. "I know a family attorney, Camille Bosch. She has handled 2 matters for Mercer Freight over the years, back when I still consulted on regional contracts. She is sharp, and she does not waste time being polite when politeness is not what the situation calls for." I called Camille from the small desk in the corner of the room, while Ren sat on the edge of the bed, one hand still resting against her stomach, listening to my half of the conversation with an intensity that made the room feel smaller than it was. Camille picked up on the second ring. I gave her the shape of it as efficiently as I could, the lawsuit, the letter, Porter, the timeline. She did not interrupt once, which told me more than anything. She eventually said how seriously she was taking it. "If Porter genuinely believes he can force an emergency filing," she said, when I finished, "the strongest thing you can do is get ahead of it. Establish paternity and custody intentions on your own terms voluntarily, with documentation that shows good faith and stability before his filing ever reaches a judge. It is a very different case if the Voss family walks in prepared instead of cornered. So how quickly can you move? I can have preliminary paperwork ready within 48 hours. Sooner if I clear my calendar for it, which I am prepared to do." A pause on her end, brief and businesslike. "Emery, I want to be honest with you. A dying woman's attorney pushing for an emergency hearing is not something either side wants dragged through a courtroom in public. There is a real chance this resolves faster through direct negotiation than through litigation. But that only works if everyone involved is willing to sit at the same table before it becomes adversarial. Then let's make sure we are the ones who get to that table first." "I will start tonight," she said, and hung up before I could thank her. I turned back to Ren, who had not moved from the edge of the bed. Something in her face had shifted while I was on the phone. Not relief exactly, but the particular steadiness of a person who has just watched someone else finally pick up half of a weight she had been carrying alone. 48 hours, I said. That is how long Camille needs to have something real in place. "We can survive 48 hours. Ren did not answer right away. When I looked over at her, something in her posture had changed since I had last checked a stillness that was not the same kind of stillness as a moment before. "Ren, I am fine," she said, though her hand had moved unconsciously to press harder against her lower back. "Just a little uncomfortable. It has been a long day." I did not entirely believe her, but I let it sit for a moment, the way I had learned to let things sit with her, rather than pushing too fast. Before I could say anything else, she made a sound I had not heard from her before, sharp and involuntary, cut off almost as soon as it started. "Ren, that one was different," she said very slowly, one hand braced against the mattress, the other pressed flat against her belly. "That one actually hurt." I looked at the clock on the nightstand, an old habit from 31 years of Corinne timing contractions that were not even mine to time, and understood with a cold and sudden clarity that whatever 48 hours Camille needed, We might not have anywhere close to that much time left before an entirely different clock took over. "How long have you been having those?" I asked. "I thought it was just my back," Ren said. "I think I have been having them for hours." I did not waste time asking her anything else. I called Otis my driver of 20 years, and he answered on the first ring, the particular alertness in his voice of a man who had been half expecting exactly this kind of call for 3 nights running. "Bring the truck to the door," I said. "Now. I think Ren is in labor." "On my way," he said, and I heard the engine turn over before he finished the sentence. I helped Ren gather the few things she needed, her hospital bag already packed, and sitting by the door, the composition notebook tucked on top, where she could reach it without looking. Her breathing had gone careful and deliberate, the pattern I would learn later that a doctor named Susan Park had taught her weeks earlier at a prenatal appointment I had known nothing about at the time. "Camille," Ren said between breaths as I got an arm under hers to help her toward the door. "The 48 hours. "Camille can wait," I said. "Right now, there is exactly one thing that matters, and it is not a courtroom." Otis was already at the curb when we came through the door, headlights cutting through the dark parking lot. The passenger door standing open before either of us reached it. Otis did not ask which hospital. He had known for 3 weeks, ever since I had quietly arranged it with him on a Tuesday afternoon. Neither of us had spoken of since that if this call ever came, it would be Watauga Medical in Boone, and that we would not be using the main entrance. "Service entrance off Deerfield," he said, more to himself than to either of us, already turning onto the highway with a smoothness that told me he had driven this exact route in his head more than once while he waited. "Camille's office called ahead yesterday in case. We are on the approved list." I had not known about that particular piece of foresight until he said it. I made a note to thank Camille properly once there was room in the world again for something as ordinary as gratitude. The highway at that hour was nearly empty, just the occasional pair of headlights passing in the other direction, and Otis kept the truck steady at a speed that would have alarmed me on any other night. I watched the mile markers go by without really registering the numbers on them, aware only of the rhythm of Ren's breathing behind me, in and out counted, and deliberate a metronome. I had no ability to slow down or speed up, no matter how badly I wanted control over something in that truck. In the back seat, Ren breathed through another contraction, with her forehead tipped forward, both hands braced against her knees. The specific, concentrated stillness of someone who has been told exactly what to do and is spending everything she has doing it correctly. The composition notebook was still in her lap, one hand never fully leaving it even as the other gripped the seat, as though the pages themselves were something she needed within reach, no matter what else was happening to her body. "Tummerso," she said, when the contraction eased enough to let her speak. "If something happens tonight, and I cannot say it later, there is a page near the back of that notebook for the baby. I want you to make sure it gets read to him eventually, whichever of us is around to do it. You will be the one who reads it to him," I said. "I am not planning on losing you tonight, Ren. I know." Her voice caught, thinned by another contraction building. "I'm asking anyway." "Then I promise," I said, and meant it with everything still functioning in my chest. Otis took the exit for Deerfield without slowing more than he had to, and the gate at the service entrance opened on a code he had apparently been given days earlier, along with instructions I was only now learning the full shape of. A woman was waiting for us under the covered entrance, compact and precise, moving already before the truck had fully stopped. "Dr. Susan Park," she said, opening the back door herself, a gurney and 2 nurses appearing behind her, as though summoned by the sound of the engine. She assessed Ren in the time it took me to unbuckle my own seatbelt. How far apart? 3 minutes, Ren managed. Maybe less now. Let's move, Dr. Park said, already directing the nurses, her voice carrying the particular calm of someone who had done this hundreds of times and had long since stopped needing to raise it for anything short of an actual emergency. I came around the truck as they transferred Ren onto the gurney, and Dr. Park glanced at me over her shoulder without breaking stride. Mr. Voss. Waiting area is through those doors, second left. I will come find you the moment there is anything to tell you. Is she going to be all right? Dr. Park stopped just for a second and looked at me directly the way a person looks at you when they have decided the truth is more useful than comfort. She is strong, and she is ready. That is the most honest answer I can give you right now, and it happens to be a good one. Then the gurney was moving again through a set of double doors that swung shut behind it, with a soft pneumatic hiss. And I was left standing under the fluorescent lights of the service corridor with Otis at my elbow, and absolutely nothing left to do with my hands. A nurse near the desk asked me for insurance information and next of kin, and I answered the questions on autopilot. The particular numbness of a man filling out forms while the actual event he cared about was happening somewhere behind a set of doors he was not allowed through. Camille's office had apparently anticipated even this, because the woman at the desk found Ren's file already flagged under a restricted access protocol before I finished explaining who I was. Coffee? Otis asked. God, no. Waiting rooms this way, he said, and did not push further, which was exactly the kind of quiet competence I had come to rely on him for over 20 years, and had never once properly told him I appreciated. I walked to the waiting room and sat down in a chair built for cleaning rather than comfort the way all hospital furniture seems to be. A television mounted in the corner played a home renovation show, with the sound off a man in a flannel shirt gesturing enthusiastically at something behind a wall that had not existed a few minutes earlier. I stared at it without watching it. The doors Ren had disappeared through were solid, windowless, painted the same institutional gray as the rest of the hallway. I had no way of knowing what was happening on the other side of them, no way of measuring the minutes except by the slow crawl of the clock above the reception desk, and no task left to occupy my hands the way I had occupied them at a workbench 3 nights running. I thought about Corin sitting in a waiting room very much like this one the year Holt was born, while I paced a different hospital hallway with considerably less patience than I had managed tonight. I thought about how much of what I understood about waiting, about letting a process unfold on its own schedule instead of mine, I had learned from watching her do it first. I thought about Loretta somewhere in a hospital bed of her own, running out of the very thing I was sitting here spending freely, and felt the specific vertigo of 2 families circling the same fundamental fact from opposite directions. One desperate to hold on to more time, and the other desperate simply to survive the next few hours of it. I sat in that plastic chair alone, and understood that for the first time since I had walked through a kitchen door at the Copper Kettle, there was nothing left for me to do but wait. I do not know how long I had been sitting in that waiting room, watching a home renovation show with the sound off before I looked up and found Holt standing in the doorway. He was still in the same jacket from that morning at the shop, and his hair looked like a man who had been running his hands through it for hours without noticing he was doing it. He did not say anything at first. He simply stood there, taking in the room, the muted television, his father alone, in a plastic chair at 11 o'clock at night. There was mud on the cuffs of his jeans, the particular pale gray mud of the gravel pull-offs up in the mountains, and I understood, without either of us saying it, exactly where those 4 hours had actually taken him. How did you know? I asked. I called you 6 times. You did not answer. He came further into the room, slow, like he was not entirely sure he had the right to be there. I called Otis after the fourth one. He did not want to tell me anything. I told him I would drive to every hospital between here and Charlotte if I had to, and eventually he decided that was a worse outcome than just telling me the truth. He should not have. He absolutely should have, Holt said, and there was nothing soft in it. Dad, she is having my child right now behind a set of doors I am not allowed through. And you were going to let me find that out after the fact, from someone else, the way I found out everything else this week. I did not have a good answer for that, so I did not try to manufacture one. Whatever careful order I had been keeping things in for the last 4 days, protecting people from truths I had decided they were not ready for, had clearly stopped serving anyone by the time my own son had to hear about his child's birth secondhand from a driver. He sat down in the chair beside me, close enough that I could see how tightly he was holding his own hands together in his lap. The same restless energy that usually went into a piece of sandpaper, now with nothing at all to occupy it. I have been driving around for 4 hours trying to figure out what I actually feel, he said after a while. I thought I would land on angry. I have been angry for 4 months. It felt like the only thing I had left that made sense. And did you land on it? No. He shook his head slowly. I landed on something worse. I landed on understanding exactly why she did what she did at the beginning, and hating that I understand it. Because understanding it means I cannot even hold on to being angry about that part anymore. Holt, let me finish, Dad. I do not do this often enough, and if I stop now, I am not sure I will start again. He turned to face me fully. I did not leave that kitchen 4 months ago because I did not love her. I left because I did not know how to be in the same room as someone who had planned to use me and still keep loving her at the same time. I thought those two things had to cancel each other out. I thought that was how it worked, and now I have spent 4 hours in a truck realizing that a person can do something unforgivable and still become someone worth forgiving if enough time passes and enough truth gets told in between. I do not know if that makes me weak, or it makes me finally understand something Mom used to say to me back when I was 17 and furious at a friend who had wronged me. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. She said the people worth keeping are not the ones who never disappoint you. They are the ones who come back and tell you the truth, once they finally understand what they did. I always thought she meant it about that one friendship. I think she might have meant it about all of us the whole time. I could not speak for a moment. The waiting room was very quiet around us, just the silent television flickering in the corner, the low hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of a cart being wheeled somewhere down another hallway. Somewhere outside, a car door closed in the parking lot, faint through the glass. The clock above the reception desk ticked forward another minute. I looked at my hands instead of at him, aware that I was breathing more carefully than I needed to, the way you breathe when you are trying not to disturb something fragile sitting near you. I did not fill the silence. I let it sit there between us the way I had learned over the last 4 days, that some things need room before they can finish being said. I am sorry, Holt said, finally quieter now. Not for leaving that night. I think I needed to leave that night. I am sorry for every day after it, that I spent telling people a version of the story that made her sound worse than she was, because it was easier than admitting how much of it I still did not understand myself. You could not have known about the baby. No. But I could have answered her calls before I knew about the baby. I could have let her explain instead of deciding I already knew everything I needed to know. He looked down at his hands. I do not know how to fix 4 months, Dad. I do not think there is a version of tonight where I walk through those doors and everything is instantly the way it should have been from the start. No, I agreed. There is not. But I am here, he said. That has to count for something. It does, I said. It counts for a great deal more than you think it does right now. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the muted television without seeing it the way people look at something when their attention has gone somewhere else entirely. What happens now? He asked. With her mother, with the lawyer, all of it. We fight it the right way, I said. Camille is already working on paperwork tonight. Documentation, custody intentions, everything done voluntarily and above board, so nobody can claim we did this in the shadows. I looked at him. But that is a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight is not about lawyers. No, he agreed. It is not. A door opened at the end of the hallway. Dr. Park stepped through it, still in scrubs, her expression giving nothing away yet, and looked directly down the corridor at the two of us sitting there. Mr. Voss, she said. Both of us stood at the same moment. She was looking at me. He's here, Dr. Park said. 5 weeks early but strong, 6 pounds 2 ounces. He came out with quite a lot to say about the whole experience. My legs did something I had not asked them to do, some combination of sitting and standing, that landed me back in the plastic chair with more force than I intended. And Ren, tired, doing well, asking for both of you actually. A small, genuine smile crossed Dr. Park's face, the first unguarded thing I had seen from her all night. Come on. She wants you to meet him. The room they had moved her to was warmer than the hallway. The lights dimmed to something gentler than the harsh fluorescence everywhere else in the building. Ren was propped against the raised bed, hair damp against her forehead, a small bundle wrapped in a striped hospital blanket against her chest. She looked wrung out in the particular way of someone who has just run the hardest race of her life and crossed the finish line anyway. Hey, she said when she saw us in the doorway. Her voice was wrecked and raw, and the most honest sound I had heard from her yet. We made it. You made it, Holt said, moving to her side before I could. I was terrified the whole drive, and I did not even do any of the actual work. She laughed, one short, cracked sound that turned into something closer to a sob, and then back into a smile. A nurse crossed the room and placed the bundle into my arms before I fully understood what was happening. And then he was simply there, small and warm and impossibly specific, weighing nothing at all. And somehow the heaviest thing I had held in years. I looked down at his face. His eyes were closed, his mouth working at something invisible, one small fist curled against his own cheek, with the absolute conviction of someone who already had strong opinions about the world he had just entered. Behind Ren's bed, a hospital bassinet sat waiting on its wheeled frame, and something about its shape, plain and unfinished looking under the fluorescent light, made me think of the rocking chair still sitting 3 weeks unfinished on my workbench. I understood holding him exactly what I still needed to go home and finish. To his name, Ren said quietly, watching me hold him, is Corin. After your wife, if that is all right. I could not speak for a moment. When I finally managed it, my voice did not come out entirely steady. It is more than all right, I said. It is the finest thing anyone has done for her memory in 3 years. I stayed until Ren fell asleep sometime past 2 in the morning. Holt in the chair beside her bed, unwilling to leave even for coffee. I drove home in the gray hour before dawn and did not sleep myself. By 7, I was on the phone with Camille. I want to see Loretta Hargrove, I said. In person. Today, if she is well enough for a visitor. There was a pause on Camille's end. The particular pause of a lawyer deciding how much to talk a client out of something before accepting that the client had already decided. That is not the conventional move, Emery. I am aware. If you want, I can arrange it through her attorney instead. Keep everything at arm's length, professional. I do not want arm's length, I said. I want to look the woman in the eye who wrote that letter and tell her myself that her grandson was born last night, and that whatever she still wants from my family, she does not need to take it from a child to get it. Camille was quiet for a moment. I will come with you. As your attorney, not as a negotiator. If she says anything that matters legally, I want it witnessed properly. Loretta Hargrove lived in a small brick house outside Asheville, the kind with a wheelchair ramp built recently enough that the wood still looked pale against the weathered porch around it. A hospice nurse answered the door and looked at us for a long moment before stepping aside to let us in. The house smelled faintly of eucalyptus and something medicinal underneath it, the particular smell of a home that has been rearranged around the needs of someone who is not getting better. Loretta was smaller than I had pictured her, propped up in a hospital bed that had been moved into what was once, judging by the built-in shelves, a dining room. A stack of unfinished needlepoint sat on the nightstand beside her, the kind of project a person starts intending to finish and eventually stops pretending they will. Her eyes were sharp despite everything else about her that clearly was not. "You must be Emery Voss," she said before I had introduced myself. "You look exactly like the kind of man who apologizes in person instead of through a lawyer." "I brought a lawyer anyway," I said. But yes, something that might have been the ghost of a laugh moved through her gone before it fully arrived. I set the folder Gideon and Renata had helped assemble on the small table beside her bed unopened. "I am not here to threaten you with this," I said. "I am here because I think you deserve to know what is actually in it from me before anyone's lawyers turn it into something neither of us fully controls anymore. And what is in it? Enough to suggest the original ruling was built on paperwork that should never have held up. My late wife signed an authentication she should not have signed. I do not know if a court today would rule differently. I know it should have had the chance to try with honest information 20 years ago." I held her gaze. "You were right to be angry, Loretta. I am not here to tell you that you were not. 20 years I have said that to everyone who would listen, and most of them stopped listening a long time ago." Her voice had gone rough, whether from illness or emotion, I could not tell. "You are the first person from your family to say it back to me. I am sorry it took me this long." "But everyone is sorry it took them this long, Mr. Voss. It is a very popular thing to be sorry about once there is nothing left to lose by saying it." There was no real venom in it. Only exhaustion, the particular flatness of a woman who had spent too many years rehearsing her own anger to abandon it easily even now. Corinne knew then. All those years. I believe she suspected. I do not think she ever let herself be certain. Loretta looked at the folder for a long time without touching it. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. "Your grandson," she said. "Ren's boy. He was born last night, 5 weeks early. He is healthy." Her eyes filled the first crack I had seen in her since we arrived, though she did not let it fall any further than that. "I want to speak to my daughter," she said. "On the phone. Now, if that can be arranged. But before I decide what any of this means." Camille dialed Ren's number and handed the phone to Loretta before either of us could suggest a gentler way to do it. Some conversations I was learning did not improve with cushioning. Loretta held the phone against her ear with both hands, the way you hold something you are afraid of dropping, and waited through 3 rings with her eyes closed. "So, Mama." Ren's voice came through the speaker, thin with exhaustion, and something sharper underneath it, the particular alertness of a daughter who has spent months bracing for exactly this call, and still is not ready when it finally comes. I hear you had a son, Loretta said. Her voice, which had been rough and combative with me only minutes earlier, softened into something I had not expected to hear from her at all. 5 weeks early, healthy. His name is Corin. A pause, static, and breath. Mama, I know what Porter has been asking me to do. I am not going to do it. I need you to understand that before this goes any further. I know, Loretta said. I have known for a while, honestly. Porter kept telling me you would come around eventually. I stopped believing him about 3 weeks ago and did not have the energy left to argue with him about it. Then what was the letter for? What was any of it for, if you already knew I wasn't going to do it? Loretta closed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice had lost whatever fight had been left in it an hour earlier. The letter was for me, she said. Not for you. I have spent 20 years telling myself that winning was the only thing that would make any of it worth what it cost me. I needed, before I ran out of time to change my mind, to at least try one more time to win. Even knowing somewhere underneath all of it that I probably would not. Mama, I do not need you to win a lawsuit for me, Ren. Loretta's voice cracked the first time I had heard it do so. I do not need Corin to be leverage for anything. I need to know before I go that you are loved. Actually loved the way I was not by people who did not need anything from you first. Ren did not answer right away. When she did, her voice had thinned into something barely holding together. I am, she said. I am loved, Mama. It took a long time to get here, and it did not happen the way any of us expected. But I am. Then that is enough, Loretta said. That has to be enough. They talked for a few more minutes, quieter, the kind of conversation that belonged to the two of them, and not to a room with a lawyer and a father-in-law standing in it. I stepped out onto the porch with Camille while it finished giving them what privacy the small house could offer. When I came back inside, Loretta had handed the phone to the hospice nurse and closed her eyes, the particular stillness of someone who has spent the last of a certain kind of energy and does not have more of it to spend today. You should go, the nurse said quietly. She needs to rest. I left the folder on the table beside her bed. I did not know, walking out to the truck, whether I had just witnessed the beginning of something healing or simply the last honest conversation two people were ever going to have. I would not find out for 3 more days. Loretta Hargrove died on a Thursday morning in her sleep, according to the nurse who called Camille's office to relay the news. She never met her grandson in person. She never saw the folder opened, never learned whether a court would have ruled differently with honest paperwork in front of it 20 years earlier. She died with the argument unfinished, the way most arguments that matter actually end, not with a verdict, but with someone simply running out of time to keep having them. I sat with that news for a long moment before I picked up the phone to tell anyone else. I thought about the folder still sitting on the table beside her bed, unopened, and wondered whether it had mattered to her at all in the end, or whether the only thing that had actually mattered was 5 minutes on a telephone with her daughter 3 days before she stopped being able to make any more calls at all. I drove to the hospital to tell Ren myself, rather than let her hear it from anyone else. She was sitting up in bed when I came in, Corin asleep against her chest, one hand resting flat over his small back, the way it had rested on her own belly for months before he existed outside of it. I did not need to say the words. She read them in my face before I crossed half the room. When she asked, this morning, in her sleep. The nurse said she went peacefully. Ren did not cry. I watched for it the way you watch for a storm you can see building on the horizon, and it simply did not come. She sat very still instead, her hand pressed flat against her sleeping son's back. her eyes fixed on some point past my shoulder that I understood without needing to ask was not actually in the room with either of us. The machines in the hallway beeped their small patient rhythms. A cart rolled past the open door and did not stop. Ren did not move for what felt like a very long time. Her hand rising and falling almost imperceptibly, with Corin's breathing, the only motion in a body that had otherwise gone completely still. "Oh, she got to hear that I was loved," Ren said finally, very quietly. "Before she went. She got that much." "She did. I keep waiting to feel something bigger than this." Her voice was steady, almost too steady, the particular flatness of someone holding an enormous weight in a very careful grip. I thought I would fall apart. I have been braced for falling apart for weeks. "Grief does not always arrive on schedule," I said. "Sometimes it takes its time finding you." She nodded slowly, not quite agreeing, not quite disagreeing, and looked back down at her son's sleeping face instead of at me. I sat with her in that silence for a long time, the two of us, and the small, sleeping weight of everything that had survived the last 4 months, and I did not try to fill it with anything else. I thought about Loretta's last words to her daughter, the ones I had stood in a small hospice house to witness. "I do not need Corin to be leverage for anything. I need to know before I go that you are loved." 20 years of anger had not gotten her what she wanted. 5 minutes of honesty at the very end had gotten her something considerably harder to hold on to, but I suspected it had mattered more. I did not say any of that out loud. Ren did not need a lesson from me that night. She needed exactly what I was already giving her, which was simply to sit there and not leave and let the silence be whatever it needed to be for as long as it needed to be it. Spring came late to Blowing Rock that year. The last of the snow held on in the shaded corner behind the shop until nearly the end of March, retreating reluctantly the way winter always seemed to in the mountains, as though it resented being asked to leave before it was finished making its point. The legal matters resolved faster than Camille had initially predicted once Loretta was gone, and Porter Ainsley discovered he no longer had a client willing to fund an emergency hearing. He withdrew the threatened filing within a week of the funeral, a brief business-like letter that read more like a formality than a surrender, though I understood it to be exactly that. Camille finalized the paperwork, establishing Holt's paternity and Ren's custodial rights on her own terms, voluntary and uncontested, precisely the outcome she had promised was possible, if we got there before anyone else forced our hand. Renata's provenance findings and Gideon's file never made it into a courtroom either. There was in the end no lawsuit left to file it in, no Loretta left to pursue it, and Ren made it clear gently but firmly that she had no interest in reopening a 20-year-old case in her mother's name, simply because the paperwork now existed to try. I filed the folder in my own office instead, a settled matter, rather than an unfinished one, the kind of thing you keep. Not because you intend to use it, but because pretending it never happened would be its own kind of dishonesty. Holt moved back into the apartment on Maple Street in early February, though it did not take him long to spend most of his nights at the small rental house Ren had found closer to the shop instead. Neither of them called it anything official, not yet. I watched them build something slower and more careful than what they had rushed into 4 years earlier, the particular caution of two people who had both learned at considerable cost exactly how much damage moves too fast. I did not ask either of them to explain the shape of what they were rebuilding. I had learned over one very long winter that some things heal faster when nobody stands over them asking for a timeline. I called Gideon the second week of March. "I have an offer for you," I said when he picked up. Not an apology dressed up as a job, a real position. Senior restoration consultant, full authority over provenance work salary, commensurate with 18 years of experience I should have kept using this whole time. There was a long pause on his end, long enough that I wondered if he had hung up without my noticing. "You are serious," he said finally. I have never been more serious about anything at the shop in years. "I will need to think about it." "Take all the time you need," I said. "The door is open whenever you are ready to walk back through it." He called back 4 days later and said yes. He started the following Monday, and within a week it was as though he had never left the particular ease of a man who had simply been waiting 18 years for someone to ask him properly. The rocking chair sat finished on my workbench by the second week of April. I had put off the last of the work. For longer than I could fully explain, even to myself, some part of me apparently unwilling to close out a project that had become tangled up with everything else that year. But once the paperwork was signed and Loretta was buried and Gideon was back at his old station near the window, I found there was nothing left standing between me and finishing it. I sanded the final runner by hand, the way my grandfather had taught me, checking the curve against a template older than I was, until it matched exactly. I oiled the walnut until the grain came up warm and dark under the shop lights. I did not know when I started that chair 3 weeks before I ever met Wren at the Copper Kettle who it was actually for. I understood by the time I finished it that some part of me had known all along. I drove it to Wren's rental house myself on a Saturday afternoon, in the bed of my truck, wrapped in a moving blanket, and carried it into the small nursery she and Holt had put together in the back bedroom. Corin was 8 weeks old, small and serious, already tracking the movement of the curtains in the afternoon light, with the concentrated attention of someone who had strong opinions about everything he encountered. Wren sat in the doorway, watching me set the chair down in the corner by the window, and when I stepped back to look at it, she came and stood beside me. "It's beautiful, Emery," she said. "It took longer than it should have." "I don't think it did." She looked at it for a long moment. "I think it took exactly as long as it needed to." Holt came in from the kitchen, dish towel still in one hand, and stood in the doorway taking it in the way he used to take in the workroom as a boy, cataloging what had changed. "You finally finished it," he said. "I finally had a reason to." He looked at me for a moment, something unspoken passing between us that did not need saying out loud, and then he crossed the room and picked Corin up from the bassinet, settling him carefully into the crook of one arm, the way a man learns to do only through practice and fear in roughly equal measure. I stood in that small room and watched my son hold my grandson in a chair I had built with my own hands, in a house that had not existed in my imagination 4 months earlier, and understood something I had spent 68 years failing to understand at the necessary speed. I had built a great deal in my life. Warehouses of furniture, a reputation, a shop that had outlasted 3 generations of Voss men who believed each in their turn that building things was the same as protecting the people who mattered to them. I had learned this particular year, at considerable cost, to almost everyone I loved, that the two things were not the same at all. A thing you build can sit finished and beautiful and entirely useless if nobody around it ever hears the truth in time to use it. I thought about Corinne, who had carried her own doubt in silence for 30 years and never once handed it to me directly. Not because she did not love me enough to try, but because she had believed the same way I had believed for most of my own life, that some truths were kinder left unsaid. I thought about Loretta, who had spent 20 years turning grief into a weapon, because grief without a target had felt to her like grief with nowhere to go. I thought about my own son, who had chosen silence over confrontation on the worst night of his life, and had needed 4 hours alone on a mountain road to learn that silence was not actually the safest choice available to him. three generations in their own different ways, mistaking quiet for protection. I did not know if Corin would inherit the same instinct. I hoped watching him blink up at the ceiling of that small room, that he would grow up in a family that had finally, however, late unlearned it. Wren settled into the rocking chair with Corin against her chest, and it held her weight exactly the way I had built it, to steady unhurried the kind of thing meant to last considerably longer than any of the people currently sitting in it. I stood in the doorway of that small room for a long moment watching the three of them, and did not feel any particular need to say anything else at all. That night I turned off every light in the shop, except the one over the workbench. My hand hovered on the switch out of old habit, ready to finish the job the way I always had. Then I remembered Corinne always left that particular lamp burning until morning, for reasons she never once explained to me in all our years together. I understood it now, standing there with the walnut shavings still on the floor. I left it burning, and I did not turn back to look at it again on my way out. Looking back on that year, I keep returning to one truth. It took me 68 years to actually learn. Silence feels like protection while you are still standing inside it. It is only afterward, once the cost has already been paid by someone you love, that you can see it was never protection at all. It was only delay wearing protection's clothes and hoping nobody looked closely enough to notice the difference. My wife carried a doubt for nearly 20 years to spare me one hard conversation. My son carried an ache for 4 months to spare himself an even harder one. I am not proud of how long it took the three of us across 2 generations of the same family to understand that the people who love us do not need to be spared the truth. They need more than almost anything else to be trusted with it. A man can spend a lifetime believing quiet is the same as strong and never once test whether that belief is actually true until it costs him nearly everything he has left to lose. I believe God allowed the truth to surface exactly when it did that year, not a single day sooner than any of us could have borne it, and not a day later than survivable. I have thanked God more than once since for a young woman brave enough to write everything down in a composition notebook page after page, trusting that someday the right person would finally sit still long enough to read it. And I have prayed to God more nights than I am willing to fully admit, that my grandson grows up in a family that chooses honesty freely on its own, instead of waiting for a crisis to drag it out of us, the way one had to drag it out of me. If you have been carrying a truth this long, telling yourself silence protects the people you love more than honesty ever could, I want to ask you something plainly. Would you have spoken sooner than I did? Tell me in the comments what you would have done differently, and exactly where in this story you would have finally said the hard thing out loud instead of waiting. If any part of this reached something real in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and stay close for the next story worth telling.